Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. Now, I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. And normally on the podcast, I would go about doing that by sharing interviews that I've conducted with both CEOs, entrepreneurs and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce those outcomes. However, this time I wanted to share with you an interview where I'm the one being interviewed, just for a change. So I hope you enjoy it. Now, let's get into the interview.
Thank you for listening to this podcast again. My name is Sydney Brouwer, and as you hear, this episode will be completely in English because I have an English guest. My guest this episode is Adrian Swinsko, an English customer experience expert. He doesn't like the term guru, but he is. And he was here in the Netherlands in September to speak on a conference that I hosted. It's called CX in One Day. And he talked about his newest book. It's kind of a manifesto, and it's about punk CX, how we can be more experimental, how we can have more courage, how we should be more daring in the area of customer experience. Because if we don't, we will lose our relevancy to companies, to boardrooms, and to the world. So we need to be more daring, be more punk, as he says, as he calls it, in the CX world. And in this episode, we will talk about that. I think it's a great episode. Thank you for joining me, being my guest, Adrian. And for all the Dutch listeners, there will be another masterclass customer-centric leadership. And it's going to be a special one because it's in the Efteling, one of the most customer-centric companies in the Netherlands. And we will spend 2 days in the Efteling talking about culture, talking about leadership, how to make an impact as a manager, as a leader in creating a customer-centric culture. This will be on the 6th and the 7th of February 2020. And you'll find more information about this at www.sydneybrouwer.nl/masterclass or in the show notes with this episode on www.sydneybrouwer.nl/72. Oh, and by the way, during the recording of this episode, we had a bit of a challenge with one of the microphones. So we recorded it with one microphone that we give to each other during the interview. So that's what you'll probably hear, but the audio should be fine. Now, let's listen to my interview with Adrian Swinsko. So in this episode, I'm talking with someone from Britain, the UK. I can't call him a customer experience guru. I just did that on stage on the event where I hosted and you did the opening keynote. But Adrian Swinsko, and you're doing a lot on the CX space. Tell us a little bit about who is Adrian Swinsko.
So, first of all, Sydney, thank you for kind of having me on your show. It's a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for doing such a great job of introducing me and setting me up for the keynote that I just did at the CX in One Day. Who am I? Well, the reason I don't like the term sort of guru and expert and all this sort of stuff is because it feels like it's a label that should be given to you and not something you call yourself. And also implies that you know everything and then you're finished. I actually think that I'm more of an explorer, a bit of a guide, a bit of a navigator in that sense. And so I'm a student of service and experience, I would say, a perpetual student, perhaps you could say. I'm interested in organizations that do better things for both their customers and their people, and it's sort of interested in what you can do in order to choose that, and the multiple different kind of answers that you can explore to try and achieve that. And so in my work, as I do a bit of advisory work, I do a bunch of workshops, I do a bunch of speaking and writing, and so all of that is fed by my, if you like, exploration, my research, kind of my talking to people, my storytelling, all that type of stuff, and being a bit of a guide and a navigator to people to find the best solutions so they can create those sort of standout service experience kind of moments.
Great. And your presentation today was about your we can call it a book, but we can also call it a manifesto. And the manifesto is called Punk CX. So it's you call it a kind of a battle cry or a call to arms. Sorry, a call to arms. Tell us, what is Punk CX?
So Punk CX is almost a reflection that comes out from a period of, it comes out of a feeling of frustration about where we are with service and experience right now. And the origin story is that I was in a pub with my friend Oshin about just over 18 months ago, and I was bemoaning the lack of progress in experience and service. And I was thinking, I wish somebody would just do something that was just a bit more punk. Everything feels slightly vanilla. And we're not producing the results that that we want. It feels like we're overcomplicating things. And then that idea sat with me for a little while. And then I thought about it more and more over the next 6 months. And it made me think about, well, where did punk come from? What is punk all about? I mean, I'm a fan of punk, but it also made me sort of delve into where does actually punk comes from. And interestingly, if you look at kind of music and the evolution of music over the course of the late 60s and 1970s, one of the biggest kind of movements in that early part of that was the emergence of prog rock. And prog rock was this quite complicated, elaborate style of rock and roll music. And many people accuse it of being almost like self-indulgent, over-elaborate, and in danger of disappearing up its own arse, if you pardon my language. And it celebrated its own virtuosity in many ways. It's like, how many synthesizers can you play at one time? How many kind of like guitars can you kind of play, and so on and so forth. How long is your solo going to be? And so it was more interested in itself than it was in its audience, its fan base. Its fan base were almost more spectators than anything else. It's like, here's a performance. And that made me think, that's interesting. If I reflected on customer experience and where it's at, and it's becoming overly complicated, technical, dominated by technology, dominated by metrics, certified, codified, functionalized, so on and so forth. And I was thinking, blimey, there's some parallels here between customer experience as it currently stands and also prog rock in the 1970s. And you could level the same accusation at it as was leveled at prog rock, i.e., is it in danger of disappearing up its own arse? The thing that happened with prog rock then, however, was that punk rock exploded out the back of it. Punk rock with its, DIY, back to basics, democratic approach, and this dare to be different. And then anybody could take part. You can pick up a guitar or a bass guitar or a drum kit, and as long as you can learn how to play a simple beat or 3 chords or whatever, and you can write a tune, then anybody can have a go. And it dared to be different, and it dared to make a difference, and to say, you might not like this, but and that's okay. And that made me think, well, if punk rock exploded out the back of prog rock, and CX is looking a little bit like prog rock did in the 1970s, then what would a punk version of CX look like? And that's the sort of the idea behind the book is to try and take this and go in a true punk style, which is short and pithy, very colorful, and I call it a visual slap in the face for the customer experience industry. And it's to the point, it challenges some norms, it asks people some big questions. It doesn't have the answer. The answer is up to the people that are involved in delivering the service and experience. But it basically says, are you doing enough? Are you daring to be different? Do you dare to be different? You say that you want to lead your field or stand out from the crowd, but do you really?
So what you're saying is that, and it also shows in the numbers when you look at, for example, the Forrester Customer Experience Index, it's been flat for years. There's no meaningful changes, which could mean that our customer experience efforts don't have a meaningful impact for our customers. That could mean we don't do anything at all. Well, that's not true, because a lot of organizations are pouring a lot of time, money, energy into customer experience efforts. It could also mean that we're all doing the same, so that no one stands out and everyone is improving, but not more or less than the competitor. Yeah, the standard, the average is going up. Or it could mean that we do the wrong things, that we do things that don't actually matter to our customers. What I think you're saying is that punk CX is, when we think of punks, it can actually be a bad word or an insult sometimes. But in this case, punk CX is someone who really dares to be different than the other companies in the market, not by wearing blue, or by getting blue hair or green hair or a mohawk, but in a way that's meaningful, different for the customers. Do you have any examples of companies that do this already?
So let me think of an example. Okay, so let me kind of give you a specific example that is in the book, and so the book is structured almost. It tips its hat to musical albums. So it has, rather than chapters, it has tracks, which there's images, and then there's if you like, lyrics that go with it. So it's to make that short, pithy point. And one of the tracks in the book is called "Great at a Few or Average at a Lot." And it asks this kind of question that we've seen this proliferation of channels across which we serve our kind of customers. Now, there's a piece of research that was done a couple of years ago that comes from Dimension Data that looked at many large organizations that said, and on average, they found that large organizations are serving their customers over 9 different channels. And that number was set to grow with technological developments to grow to about 11 on average over the course of like that last year and this year. The challenge with all of that is that many of those organizations, when they were surveyed, were asked, how many of those have you got connected? And only 8% of the population that was surveyed actually admitted to having all of their channels connected. So what organizations seem to be doing is adding kind of channels because that's what they think that customers kind of like want. But all that's doing is adding complexity to their business and exacerbating the situation, which is an unconnected, disjointed kind of customer experience. Now, if you think about that, then you have to ask the question is like, what do we want to do? Do we want to be great at few or average at a lot? And we're tending towards the average by adding and adding without actually taking away. Now, if you look at some of the big examples of some of the big leaders that we all hold out as being the service and experience leaders, like the Amazons and the Apples and the Zappos of this kind of world, you know, the usual suspects. And it's funny that the usual suspects don't change very much, and they haven't changed very much for the last kind of 5 years. Let's take Amazon as an example, or Apple as an example. If I ask you kind of to tell me how many different channels do they serve their customers over, you could probably count them on one hand. It's nowhere near the number of 9, or it's nowhere near the number of 11. Because I think they've made a conscious choice to say, we're here, and we're going to be great here, and this works for us. And here's the interesting thing. We all know from old research that people will pay more or will travel for better service or better experience. We know that they will do that physically, but they will also do it digitally as well. So choosing to be great in a few digital kind of channels, people will travel for that because they prefer better service and better experience. And if they hear about it, they will hunt it down rather than just accepting average in a place. So it becomes greatness becomes this attractor that will mean that people will travel both physically and digitally in order to get the service and experience that they want. Now, therefore, the challenge to firms is to ask themselves, why are we in that channel? Why are we adding that channel? And if we're adding more channels, here's another kind of question. For adding channels, which channels are we taking away? Which channels are we not being good at? What channels are we choosing to be great at? Because I don't think we're making those conscious choices. We need to choose what's the right channel mix for us, and more doesn't always mean better.
Yeah. Brings out an example of an hotel where I wanted to book a room for a seminar, and they had a live chat on their website. And when I asked if they had availability on the date, they said, "Yeah, can you please send us an email?" Why do you have this channel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's absolutely the case in point. It's like, why do you have the live chat if it's not connected to email?
It is.
It's like you could quite quickly just kind of said, well, okay, if you click on this, it'll send us an automatic email with some pre-populated kind of fields where it says, I've got an inquiry kind of book, and you're like, boom, done, fixed. the cracks in the systems that we create are the things that annoy customers. They turn around and go like, why is this not working like this? It's like, you want me to exert effort to do this. Yeah. So the idea of just making it easy for people, make sense sort of for people, is it requires us to make conscious and sometimes very hard choices. Choosing not to do things sometimes much harder. Inevitably, well, almost always it's much harder than choosing to do things.
And when you talk about Apple, we all know that if you want to have the best service from Apple, you need to go to the Genius Bar. And it's not easy. You have to go to a store. You have to make an appointment. But when you're there, you get great service.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, is that now, you can say it's not easy, but they have a process for managing kind of that. It's understood. You send them, you go into the website, you book an appointment, and you do the thing. And then there's the process of what happens when you're in store, and they inevitably almost always kind of like fix your problem. I've had kind of like some catastrophes happen to me with kind of some of my Mac equipment where I've spilt coffee on a laptop and tried to get it recovered, and it's like a personal nightmare. But when you get there, they're great, right? Because they are there to solve your problem, and they will do anything they can to solve your problem in a really kind of pragmatic, sensible, straightforward way. I asked when I actually had that time where I'd spilt a cup of coffee on my laptop and I got black screen, dead, nothing left. I said to them, well, how much is it going to cost to repair? And they were like, well, actually, probably costs more to repair than getting a new one. I'm like, okay, thank you for being honest. They recommended the lower cost option, and I went, fine, let me kind of buy it. And luckily enough, I was covered on my house insurance, so my home insurance had a Business Plus thing on it, which meant that it was able to recover all of that. But they were just straightforward and to the point. They were really helpful, trying to recover things, make sure everything was okay. Luckily, I had everything backed up about 2 days ago, so I was like, thank goodness. But I got what I wanted, when I wanted it. Now, I had to go through a few things to get there, but what I got when I was there was exactly what I wanted.
Yeah. So when I think about companies that really have a standout experience, and I think punk might be the right word, although it's not an insulting, but that's not what punk is, right? In this case, I would think about Citizen M. Yes. That is a different hotel.
I stayed there last night. Really? Their design of the whole experience is exemplary.
I love the hotel. I really love it. So I went to Scotland with my girlfriend this summer, and we have all stayed in B&Bs and stuff, because that's what you do when you're in Scotland. But the last night we stayed in Glasgow in the Citizen M, and that was like, this is the proper way to end your holiday. Love that. And when you talk about stores, I think Lush is one as well.
I think the thing I really like about Lush is one of those things is that, Lush feels a little bit like entering the duty-free store when you're at a modern airport. It becomes like an olfactory assault on your senses. So you walk in and it's like, you get like punched in the nose with all these smells. And so I don't really go to Lush because I don't really like all the smells, and also the products are not really my things. But I do appreciate it. I do also appreciate that it's not for everybody, and I can see by my own reaction to it, and that's fine, and they're okay with that. They also had this other dimension to it where they're particularly outspoken about what's in their products and what they do and how they do it. They are, I feel like, nakedly political about some of the things that they get behind and how it supports their business and the products that they make and the things that their customers are interested in. So the interesting thing that they do is it's not just about the store; it's also about kind of what they stand for as a business and what their customers stand for. So there's an alignment of interests. So it goes, the relationship goes beyond purely the products or the service that they provide, and it's a much broader relationship. So people have a relationship with the brand and the company and what the company stands for. And so it's, when they're paying their money, it's almost like supporting a cause rather than just buying a product.
Yeah. So that's also what Punk CX is, and not a lot of companies do that, but they really make a statement. We are not for everyone, but everyone is welcome here. Indeed. So we did not design our products and our services and our buildings and our stores to be liked by everyone, but if you like it or not, you're welcome here, and you can buy our products, of course. And I think that is the choice that more and more brands need to make to really get your place in the market. There's another thing in your presentation where you talked about just yet, and that was, I think, maybe one of the most important slides, and that is customer experience is not about the. We can say it in this. We can say it in this podcast. It's not about the fucking metrics. So please elaborate on that.
So I must kind of like hat tip to an Austrian company called More Than Metrics, who are the source of the poster, which sits in my office. And I asked them for permission to take a photograph of it and quote it and include it in the book. And Mark Stickdorn, who I think is responsible for writing This Is Service Design. They're the ones that supplied the poster. So I have it sitting in the wall of my office. And so if somebody kind of video calls me, then it's in the background of any kind of video call, and I see the people sort of like leaning over, trying to look past me to go, "Oh, I like your poster," which says CX is about more than effing metrics. Now, the reason I bring that up is because what I find is that one of the first things, if you talk to people about great service or great customer experience, one of the first things that can kind of come up is like, "Oh, we've got an NPS score of like plus 50. I'm like, really? You're like, that's kind of like, that's your measure of success. Yes, it's a measure, but what happens? It's more. It has to be more than that. For me, I think this great service. There's a thing in the book about it is. Thinking about this idea of service and what are you actually doing and why are you doing it? I actually truly believe that to serve and to deliver great service is both a privilege and an honor. And it becomes a calling, a vocation. It's choosing to do something that matters. It matters to the people that you're working with, and also that you're serving. And there's joy and there's grace and there's art in it. And that isn't brought forth when you just talk about metrics. Metrics can tell you how you're getting on, but they don't tell you about the color and the form and the beauty of the thing that you're doing.
Actually made a difference.
Exactly. And so, you know what? Some of those things is like bringing those metrics to life, I think, is the thing that really important. So there was a story that I shared just at the end of the presentation where you asked me a question, and I told a story about a company called IAG, which is an insurance company in Australia, and they use their NPS scores as a way of engaging kind of the whole organization in terms of what those numbers mean and how to connect all the dots, as it were. And the thing that they did was that they gathered a series of senior leaders and took them down to the call center, and then they drew out all of the people that get really positive NPS scores that morning, pulled out the details, and then got all of the leaders to actually call each of those customers just to say thank you. Now, once the customers got over the shock and like, "Oh, what are you trying to sell me?" They kind of said, "No, we just want to call to say thank you." But then say, what we want to do is we are calling to say thank you, and then to ask, to tell you that one, we're writing a thank you note, thank you card to the person that served you this morning, and we just wanted to ask if there was anything that you wanted to add to that card. And then the customers were like, "Whoa," shocked, and then going, "Oh, well, yeah." So Sydney or Sarah or Stephen or Joan kind of like did X, Y, and Z, and that's what that made it really, really great. So the leader then used to write that down on the card, and then they thank the customer for that, because then they said, "We are now going to hand deliver that card to the agent, the rep that served you." They said, "Wow, that's amazing. So thank you for calling." So they hung up, they finished filling the card. Then they walked round to where that representative, that agent, that consultant was sitting, and hand delivered that card to them. For me, there's a number of things that happen kind of there. One, there is we talk about doing research and asking for feedback and closing the loop. That's a completely different level of closing the loop. That's like an organic closing the loop around imagine how that consultant kind of feels when they get that card from the senior leader that says, we spoke to the customer you served. They think you're a rock star. By the way, this is what they said about you. Just want to say thank you. Just to recognize them. I mean, imagine what that person felt like. Imagine just what it felt like to be recognized by they're just going, I'm just trying to do a good job, but you're going, wow, that's amazing. Thank you. So from an employee engagement perspective, but just the whole sort of closing the loop sort of thing, for me, punk is, like I said in the presentation, it's about daring to try and to take risks, to try new different things, to willing to try things that might not work. It's an attitude and a mindset saying that average or normal is just not good enough. And actually, if we want to truly serve, then we have to be willing to go and do that extra thing. This is not new. This is almost like a packaging up using a punk metaphor, because here's my concern. You talk about the Forrester Index. The results have been flat for the last 2-3 years, if not more. There's also other research that says between 70 and 80%, if not more, of all big CX and transformation projects are failing to deliver their objectives. Here's for me, I think the real risk is that if we don't start to make some material differences to businesses in the next 18 to 24 months, then CX initiatives are in danger of being put in the too hard to do column and will go exactly the same way as the CRM industry went about 25 years ago, which is all, ta-da and kind of promise, then felt really hard to do, and then went into that, as Gartner would call it, that trough of disillusionment, and takes about 15 years to dig yourself out of it. And that is the real urgency, the real imperative, and the real challenge is you have to dare to do things differently to make that kind of difference. If not, we'll get put in the cupboard.
And that's not good for our customers. Well, that's a great, it's a concerning note to end on, but we'll end on this podcast. Adrian, where can we find more about you?
So you can find me, the best place to find me is just search for my name, Adrian Swinscoe, which is ADrian SWINSCOE. And you'll find me on social channels, my blog, my Forbes column, Amazon for the books and all, et cetera, et cetera. But if you find me and you want to say hi, then please do.
Great. I'll put a link to your book, to your some of your Forbes columns that you write, and to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes with this episode. Thank you very much for joining me in this podcast.
Thanks very much. Wow, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as we say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.